committee will be back in order. You know how we got to swear you in. Mr. Katz, we're getting your nameplate. So if you guys would please stand up, we'll do that. And again, I apologize. I knew the first panel was going to take a while. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? Let the record show that both witnesses answered in the affirmative. And we will start with Doctor. It's good to have you with us again. You've been in front of this committee and several committees. We appreciate your expertise, and you as well, Mr. Katz. So you're just stuck with me. I apologize, but Doctor, you're recognized.
Chairman Jordan, it's an honor to appear before you today to talk about the Department of Energy Loan Guarantee. My name is Vicky Guruji. I'm a senior research fellow at the Mercator Center at George Mason University, where I study tax and budget issues. Advocates for renewable energy are right to be outraged by subsidies going to fossil fuels. Yet they are wrong to think that in order to address subsidies they don't like, they should demand large amount of subsidies for energy they like. The Department of Energy's 1705 Loan Guarantee Program is a cornerstone of the U.S. renewable energy policy. The policy is often justified on two grounds. First, advocates argue that renewable energy companies do not have access to sufficient credit to support new projects. In addition, the DOE argues that encouraging investment in green energy would create up to 5 million jobs. So now let's look at how these claims stand up to scrutiny. So looking at the flow of 1705 loans, we find that first, some of the loans have gone to companies that would have not been able to get funded in the open market without the loan guarantees because they were deemed too risky. Not all of them were horrible bets, but many of them were. So far, 3 companies have gone under and at great cost to taxpayers. So let's take the Abound company that this panel is about, this hearing is about. I mean, in the end, after the company has sold its asset, the price tag for taxpayers will be roughly $50 to $60 million and paid by the American people at a time where they're hurting a lot. It is possible that many of these companies are not, these companies that went under may not necessarily be representative of the entire portfolio, and that's another problem. That's my second point. Nearly 90% of the 1705 loan went to subsidized projects backed by large companies that very likely would have had access to capital if their project was indeed viable. Third, under the 1705 loan program, 16 million in loans were guaranteed, and according to DOE, 2,388 permanent jobs were created, and that means that taxpayer exposures for each alleged permanent jobs created is 6.7 million jobs. And so it speaks very poorly to the quality of this loan program as a jobs program. But understand that this is actually not even really representative of what's happened, because when the company goes under, you have that exposure and you're left with 0 jobs. So the data speaks for itself, but the real problem is actually way worse than this. In fact, failures like Solandra, Abound, Beacon Power are only symptoms of problems much more fundamental with loan guarantees program, and in particular this program. So they suffer from 3 particular failure problem. Every loan guarantee transfer risk from lender to taxpayer, which creates a moral hazard. Because the loan amount is guaranteed, banks don't really have an incentive to do proper scrutiny and proper diligence. What these loans do is they privatize gains and they socialize risk. In other words, the taxpayers bear the risk, but the profit, if they are profits, are bared by the private company and the banks that lended the money. Second, every loan guarantee gives an incentive to lender to shift resources away from to subsidized project and away from non-subsidized one, independently of the merits of the project. And this has cascading effect. For instance, when the government subsidizes a project, it is perceived as safe. That means that venture capitalists, who are actually in the business of providing money to high-risk customer actually will leave that market. But another thing happens, which is much more counterintuitive. Other private investors will actually divert resources from other non-subsidized projects towards subsidized projects, again, independently of their merits. So, for instance, in the previous panel, we heard that Abound Solar got some $150 million, I guess, after getting that guaranteed. Some of this may have come independently, but it is very likely in this example that some of that money came only because of the government guaranteed, and that meant basically taking money away from other, maybe green companies that would have actually succeeded. Third, at their worst, every loan guarantee introduces political incentive into business decision, creating the condition for businesses to seek financial reward by pleasing political interest rather than customers. This is called cronyism, and it's a bipartisan problem, and it entails real economic cost. So whatever the intention that motivated the program, the evidence is clear. It just doesn't work. The 17-0 loan program does expose taxpayers to Solyndra, Abound, Beacon Power-like waste, but more of a concern are the systematic distortions it introduces into the market and the unintended consequences those can have. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate your testimony. Mr. Katz, you're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. I serve on the board of directors of 4 U.S. clean energy companies and just served on the board of a National Academy of Sciences study recommending to Congress ways to strengthen U.S. competitiveness. Abound Solar attracted broad support, including from Indiana Republican Governor Mitch Daniels, for its $400 million loan guarantee. Abound raised about $300 million from private investors, including from British Petroleum. The DOE structured its loan guarantees to Abound in tranches in order to reduce its risk. So only $70 million of the $400 million is at risk. And as noted by the Wall Street Journal, DOE could receive about $30 million of that back, leaving a federal loss of about $40 million, or 1/10 of the loan loss guarantee. This reflects prudent DOE lending risk management practices. Overall, the DOE loan guarantee program has had a 4% default rate, which is just 1/4 of the losses projected for and budgeted for. A 4% default rate means a 96% rate. In the real world, where facts matter, a 96% success rate gets you an A. The loan program has done exactly what it was intended to do, help create over $35 billion in investments in renewable energy where the private sector lending was not available. Congress set aside a credit subsidy because it knew there would be job losses because the program supports innovation, and these losses are proving far less than projected for and budgeted for. In the real world, where U.S. companies are investing to build jobs and strengthen America's competitive position in global markets, the DOE loan guarantee program is a big success. U.S. success in clean energy matters a lot to the U.S. military. Department of Defense is the largest energy consumer in the world. Secretary of the Navy, Ray Mabus, put it this way. Why the interest in alternative energy? The answer is pretty straightforward. We buy too much fossil fuel from potentially or actually volatile places on Earth. Every time the cost of a barrel of oil goes up $1, it costs the United States Navy $31 million in extra fuel costs. But it's costly in more ways than just money. For every 50 convoys of gasoline we bring in, we lose a Marine. We lose a Marine killed or wounded. That is too high a price to pay for fuel. In the words of then Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullen, energy is about not just defense, but security, not just survival, but prosperity. Our national defense infrastructure and systems hold the potential to help stem the tide of strategic security issues related to climate change. The U.S. military, U.S. scientists, and the National Academy of Sciences are unambiguous in their acceptance of the reality and threat of climate change. So why is this Congress undermining U.S. clean energy industry solutions to climate change? Our major competitors, including China and Germany, have invested heavily in expanding their domestic wind and PV corporations. Today, of the top 10 global wind and PV manufacturers, only one of each is located in the United States. We should be deeply concerned about the security implications of the U.S. losing its global competitive leadership position in these critical industries that were largely invented here in the United States in a multi-decade collaboration between U.S. corporations, U.S. DOE, the U.S. military, and U.S. universities. Abdication of U.S. congressional support for U.S. renewable energy industries that were largely created here in America is a disaster for U.S. companies, for U.S. competitiveness, and for U.S. security, but it's a big win for China. Other governments support rather than undermine their domestic clean energy industries. So why are members of this Congress distorting and denying what is clearly a successful American program? If the U.S. military is forced to import the technology it needs to achieve its mission of shifting to clean energy, U.S. security will be weakened. For financial, employment, and security reasons, the U.S. DOE should use the unused loan guarantee funds to support another $30 to $40 billion in U.S. clean energy companies and programs. If this Congress is willing to support America's innovative corporations, the U.S. can regain its global leadership in clean energy and address climate change in a way that builds on U.S. ingenuity and creates American rather than Chinese jobs. Most Americans know that climate change is happening. Most Americans are in favor of renewable energy because it's clean, U.S. grown, and getting cheaper. Most Americans understand that the government gives even larger subsidies to other forms of energy. Most Americans understand that in supporting innovative things, you're not going to bat 100%, but that 96% is obviously a success. And most Americans want this Congress to use its common sense. Thank you.
If this was so good, Mr. Katz, why do you need the taxpayer dollars? You talked about a 96% success rate. Why do you need taxpayer money put at risk? Dr. Guruji talked about how most of these companies got private investment dollars. If it's such a great thing, if it's so wonderful, why do we need the taxpayers to put up millions of dollars and as we unfortunately know, lose several hundred millions of dollars as 3 of these companies went bankrupt?
The reason the U.S. provides subsidies for energy across the board and has done so for 5 or 6 decades is to promote American production of energy. A relatively small proportion of that support has gone to renewables. The reason it's gone to renewables, it's U.S. produced, it's cleaner, it makes the U.S. competitiveness stronger, it creates employment. The success of that program is illustrated by the 96% success rate. That is a terrific success.
How much of that 96%, I think, is actually less than that, because with 26 companies, 3 of them went bankrupt. But of that 96%, how many of them do you think would have made it on their own?
So the 96% represents 96% of the dollars that were spent are coming back. So from an investment perspective, it's a 4% default rate or less. That's a big success.
Well, frankly, it would have been lower than that. I think the last time you were here a couple months ago, you stated that the LPO needed to move faster and be more aggressive. You said that while sitting, you said this while sitting next to Mr. Witzow with Abound Solar, whose company has since gone bankrupt. So obviously, if we'd have moved faster relative to Abound, the taxpayers would have lost a lot more money, maybe all of that $400 million.
A 96% success rate is really terrific by any measure. It's much more successful in other programs supporting energy. Sir, you asked a question about employment impact, and I want to speak to that.
Go ahead.
The U.S. Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, in its May 2011 report entitled Estimated Impact of American Recovery and Reinvestment Act on Employment and Economics Output, found that these investments, including the DOE Guarantee Program, raised gross domestic product between 1.1 and 3.1% and increased the number of full-time jobs between 1.6 and $4.6 million with what would have happened otherwise. Again, that's the U.S. Congressional Budget Office. So the job creation impact has been large, and if this Congress
would support— But the question always remains, as Dr. Guruji pointed out, would it have happened anyway? How much can be directly attributable to the fact that the taxpayers put up money? And the only thing we know for certain You can talk about the success rate, but what we know for certain, success rate would mean for the taxpayers that every dollar went out came back. That's success. Right now, we know that's not the case. 3 companies went bankrupt, and we've lost hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer money. So how much of that would happen anyway?
So
the point is, you don't know, and no one knows.
the answer is,
And frankly, how many companies that maybe were better than these bigger companies, as Dr. Guruji pointed out, who got taxpayer dollars, how many of those companies are out there would have probably got investment from private equity, private dollars, but for the fact they said, you know what, we're going to put the money where it's a little safer, where the government's backed it up. So there's a company out there, I would bet, and this is something no one can prove, but you just know there's a company out there that may have some technology that really could help our country, really could help Admiral Mavis, as you referenced, really could help our national security, really could be beneficial, but they're not getting financing because of this program.
That's not true. I'm
Heck, it
actually a
isn't
venture
true.
capital investor, and when we look at companies, we look at their ability to scale and compete internationally. I was actually on the board of a couple companies that applied for funding. The process to get Federal funding is very rigorous. They would not have received private funding had they not received it. Again, the 3 companies that have had financial problems, there's only partial exposure. We're talking today about Abound. Of that $400 million loan, only $40 million will end up not being repaid back. Overall, in this
Only
program,
$40 million.
there's
Only
a
$40 million.
96%
It's easy to say, Mr. Katz. It's easy to say when it's not your money. You said you were on the board of 4 different companies. Any of those 4 companies, did they apply for dollars in the 1705 program?
None of them did.
Does your company is capital E, right?
Correct.
And I'm looking at one of the things from your company, marketing enabling measures. This is from, I assume this is from something that's put out by your company. And you talk about government or private parties can provide full or partial loan guarantees under default. You talk about things that you do. So have you ever worked on behalf of any of the companies that receive taxpayer dollars?
I served on the board of a company that applied for a DOE loan guarantee. After 2 years, it ended up not getting it. That company was then purchased by Saint-Gobain in France. It illustrates why, if all the other countries support their companies, the United States needs to.
Have you ever consulted?
We should not cede the race on clean energy.
Have you ever done consulting work for companies who have applied for and received taxpayer dollars in the 1705 program?
No, sir, I have not.
Okay. Dr. Guruji, I want your thoughts on this idea that this is a 96% success.
Well, first, we're just at the beginning. Let's see where it ends up. But I mean, I think the data.
But are you like me? I don't accept that as the definition of success.
I don't.
Taxpayers only lost hundreds of millions. They didn't lose billions. So that's a successful program.
I agree. And by the way, I mean, some of that cost, I mean, is totally underestimated, right? I mean, certainly that is the cost for this given program. But let's not forget that this loan guarantee opens the door to a lot of other government subsidies. So, for instance, NRG, that got $3.8 billion in subsidies over several projects, is also eligible for a $430 million grant from Treasury, which used to be.
Oh, and some of these were eligible for export-import dollars, too.
Exactly. And there's a gigantic amount of double dipping. The Export-Import Bank then, go and subsidize foreign companies in order to, and then local and state governments that give tax credits. So, I mean, I think the cost to taxpayers is actually way bigger than what it looks. And we don't know how big the failure will be in the end. But more importantly, I mean, so many of these companies are actually backed by very large companies that would have had access to capital, very likely, maybe not at the price that they would have liked. And more importantly, I actually think is this process actually tends to do a lot of the thing that got us in the financial mess, which is the private sector usually requires some 40% of equity for 60% debt. And because of the loan guarantee, then company now can get 80% debt and only 20% in equity. And I think this is fairly irresponsible.
I just want to point out that we are going to have a hearing in a couple of weeks on the Export-Import Bank and its relationship to this as well. So you made me think of that when in your answer. One last question for both of you. I'll start with Mr. Katz. Do you think Dr. Drew made this in her opening statement, made this point in her opening statement, that there's the potential for political influence, cronyism, whatever term you want to use, there's the potential for that when you have this amount of money being available for private companies to get a hold of. And so you've sat through some of these hearings, Mr. Katz. You've been here. I don't know if you were here for the first couple hours of this hearing, but do you think there's any that political connections, cronyism, had anything to do with this program?
You know, there's hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies have gone to energy, fossil fuels, nuclear, and so forth. I'm
talking specifically about 1705.
1705 is a relatively small amount compared to that. I think there is potential. My impression is DOE has done a very rigorous job in making sure that doesn't happen. I know that the screening and due diligence process is extremely rigorous and arguably too rigorous and arguably too slow.
Doctor?
I mean, there is political connection. The existence of government itself, I mean, the availability of government money, whether it's in the form of a grant, means that actually these companies are going to be seeking these governments' favor. And I think, if anything,
and you two, both of you, experience in watching government and seeing this kind of stuff, these kind of programs. Have you ever seen what we've talked about this hearing? You ever seen where an email comes from the company who's trying to get the loan, asking the person who's going to decide whether they get the loan to edit a letter that's going to be sent to the White House Chief of Staff? You ever seen that kind of stuff? And you referenced other energy, other forms of energy that get some kind of help. You ever seen that take place with those other forms?
I don't think that letter was actually sent.
No, that's not my point. You ever seen that kind of coziness between the private sector and the person who's deciding whether they get taxpayer money?
Yeah, I think both Republicans and Democrat congressmen weigh in.
Specifically, have you ever seen that? That's the question.
Have I ever seen direct?
That kind of coziness where the person deciding whether they're going to get billions of dollars in the BrightSource example, where they're asked to edit a letter, they actually do edit the letter that's going to be sent to the White House Chief of Staff when they're trying to get $1 billion of taxpayer money. You ever seen that in any other energy area?
I don't think that letter was sent, sir.
That's not the question. Have you ever seen the person who is deciding whether the loan guarantee is going to get approved, have you ever seen them actually edit a letter that the company is looking to send to the White House Chief of Staff? You ever seen them edit a letter? You ever seen that kind of behavior in any other area other than the 1705 program?
I don't think it was appropriate. I haven't seen a letter like that was actually
Doctor, have you ever seen that before?
I haven't, but obviously I'm not an expert. I can just say that this is not, for instance, Mercatus does fundraising, and we don't do this. We don't ask the people we're asking money, hey, can you please edit this?
Yeah, and you would be fine because that's public sector, but this is the private sector asking the government, trying to get taxpayer money. Seems kind of unusual?
It seems
very unusual.
But I mean, the economic literature is actually full of evidence that this is what you get when you have the government.
Yeah, we just now see it up close. And Mr. Katz hasn't seen it before.
I actually worked at DOE, and the level of engagement on both sides of the aisle and from CEOs, who I assume were both Republican and Democrat, we never asked, in terms of trying to find out information, make the case for the plant being built in their district. That happens all the time. It's standard business.
It's standard business for the government employee to tell the private sector, hey, if you're going to send a letter to the White House, here's how you should write it. That's standard business?
Again, I don't think that letter was sent, so you're asking a hypothetical. I'm just saying that.
No, I'm not.
I'm just saying that what happened.
The letter was edited. It was going to be sent to the White House. They chose not to after the fact. What I'm asking is, you're saying this is common practice. I'm saying, really? You've seen this before?
I have never seen a letter that was actually sent that was actually, I was unable to read the text, so I don't know what the letter said, but I would say it is very normal.
Forget what the letter said. Just at this point, if you ever, in your experience at the Department of Energy, when you were there, did you know of anyone at the Department of Energy who, when they're approving some kind of loan for a private company and they're asked to edit something that's going to be sent to the White House, you ever seen them actually edit that and advise them how to do it?
The level of involvement in the form of letters, visits, and emails from corporate CEOs, from governors of both Republican and Democrat, and from members on projects in which businesses in their jurisdiction were being considered for funding, that is a constant and unending stream, takes up an enormous amount of time of DOE to deal with that. That is standard practice, yes.
Okay. Doctor, I'll give you the last word if you want. Where does this all end, Doctor? Where are we headed? We keep this going down this road.
Well, I mean, it's hard to know where it's heading, but I guess it's going to be more government guarantees, probably some failures, more subsidies down the road, but more importantly, with respect to the, I mean, I actually think that the fact that a private industries needs the support of the government is never a good sign. And then where does it end? I mean, then you have competition from abroad. Then what do we do? I mean, if price falls, what is the next step the industry, or what is the next demand from the industry? Are they going to demand that the government guarantee certain level of prices? I mean, it is likely this is where we're heading. And we know what that's done in other industries such as sugar and steel. And this is not good for the American people.
Well, thank both of you for taking time. I apologize for you having to wait, but appreciate your patience and your expert testimony. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.